With increasing chemical resistance of various pests and diseases, it's becoming even more important to have animals in the national flock that can cope with assaults from production-sapping parasites. Welsford sheep farmer Gordon Levitt bought his first stud sire when he was 17 years old. Since then, he's been breeding sheep, selecting for superior worm resistance.
The focus of the stud basically is to produce hardy sheep which will survive on country which is not getting any fertiliser anymore, and to try and get natural resistance to parasites. After 30 years and spending a lot of money and a lot of time, we have just about cracked the worm problem, particularly with Barber's poleworm. And last year we had 88% of our rams that were put up for sale that had never had a drench. I first found probably about 50 years ago that there was a genetic factor in feet, foot problems, and so I consciously selected for good feet and stopped treating them, because if you treat bad feet, they'll only go on to produce more progeny with bad feet. And having succeeded in virtually eliminating foot problems in our sheep, I noticed that so far as the worm problem was concerned, that while some lambs were beating the dog out the front of the mob, some others were hanging back. So I believe there was a genetic factor in the worm situation. My grandfather was losing 50% in the early days, way back in the 1880s, of his lambs with Barber's pole in the autumn. Because, as my father said, he didn't know to put them on the bush clearings where there were less worms and they had more time for their immune systems to develop. It's tough up here, and the climate puts them under stress. We have cattle tick that are around from about August through till March, and they are sucking blood the whole time, which in turn has a negative impact on the immune system. Pneumonia has been a major problem up until recent years, and we have lost up to nearly 10% over the February-March period. There are a whole lot of other bugs in the north, like causing pink eye and so forth. So conditions here are tough, but being positive, the tougher the conditions, the better environment it is to breed for resistance to all these problems. The belief that there could be a natural way of overcoming the problem via the immune system. I didn't understand that in the early days when I started. I just wanted to breed sheep that didn't have worms. And now I realise that worms are not the problem. Worms are needed to trigger the immune system and get the immune system working, and when it's working, you get a balance in the situation of worms challenging the immune system and the immune system responding and overcoming the problem, which happened in nature. I think we're on a treadmill of bringing out new drenches and only lasting 10 years and then having to come up with new drenches. And the whole thing is bad in that we're keeping alive the most susceptible sheep, so the national flock is getting more susceptible to worms, and we've got the best program for breeding tough worms, in that we eliminate the vast majority and just keep the strongest to carry on the next generation. This is a ram lamb, and he'll be shorn in about 6 weeks' time. He's got a lot of characteristics that I want. Head cover, quality about there. He's got a very nice fleece of wool. The whole thing is a balancing act, and you've got to have sound structure to support performance. So the two go hand in hand, and then you add the disease traits like eczema and worm resistance. You are selecting for quite a number of factors, including wool, and so I try to select in the top 10% for each characteristic. I would not compromise the structure of the sheep or wool quality for resistance. And sometimes I might pick a sheep in the top 10% for resistance that's got all these other characteristics. Ideally, I'd like to pick a sheep that's top in every department, but that's not always possible. When we get the results back of the fetal egg count, we have a look at the eye colour, not the eye, but the membrane around the eye. And if it is a rosy pink, that indicates that the Barbus pole worm is not active or is having a minimum effect. And we actually put more importance on that than what we do on the figures, because that is an actual test of how much blood a sheep has in its body. You can have a situation where a lamb can be severely parasitised and have low fetal egg counts, because immature worms, before they're shedding eggs, can suck a lot of blood. And it only takes 500 Barbus pole worms to kill a sheep. It's been known for 30 years by parasitologists that it is possible to breed sheep that have a reasonable degree of resistance to worms. It's never been taken up. There's only a hardcore of a small number of breeders who have been doing it, and I think there are a number of reasons why it hasn't taken on, but I think the demand for less chemicals in the food chain will eventually have a big impact. And I think the realisation through the work that I'm doing and some of the others are doing, that it is possible to breed sheep that can withstand worm challenges.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.